Okay, excellent. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. Hopefully you had your coffee. This is not the most exciting or exhilarating content, so you should have shored yourself up. Hopefully you're okay. I have had too much. What we're going to talk about today is the reporting compliance factors, and what we wanted to do for this session was focus solely on the colleges. So we're having a second section next week, which will be the secondary schools, and there's just pieces that are relevant to you that's not relevant to them, and so we thought a standalone session would probably be really helpful. What we're going to do for the course of the conversation is I'm going to go through my slide deck here, which you guys have all got a hard copy of. I'll email this out to everybody as PDFs today, just so you have for your records. But then when we get through my presentation, which is going to be about 35, 45 minutes, we're going to flip over to Janine Fell. And Janine Fell is from Business Solver. So what Business Solver is going to do is they're going to jump on from Des Moines, and they're going to put up their own slide deck and go through what they have available for all of the colleges and universities to take advantage of should you so feel the need. So what we'll talk about is what is going to be required, how you go about this collection, considerations you should be making, and then what we wanted to end it up with was what resources are available for you to take advantage of so that if you wanted to pursue that path, you have an available option. Lunch will be delivered, Colleen told me, around 11:45. Those of you that are online, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go to the vending machine or something. And I presume that we'll probably be wrapped up by about 12:30. Now, if there are any questions throughout the course of this, we want to make this as open a dialogue as possible. If you're online, you can email those in, or I guess use the GoToMeeting, and Colleen will relay those to us. And if you're in the room, I'll repeat the question for the benefit of those people who are online. Okay? And so, without further ado, let's go through the nuts and bolts of the. This is my favorite title of any presentation I've ever given. My kids were asking, what was I working on? Oh, kids, it's the 1094, 1095C filings, and the compliance factors as a result. But it should be fun. All right. So, what we wanted to talk about in short shrift is how institutions such as yours identify yourself as a large employer. We won't dwell too much on that because you all are. So that's really not that difficult of a data point to collect. One that is difficult is how do you actually count your people? All right, that's been very amorphous. And we want to apply a structure so that you feel more comfortable through the course of the 2015 calendar year as to how you can get all of your ducks in a row. The measurement period question is one that's been batted around just considerably. There is no concrete answer. The measurement period is up to the employer group to establish. We'll make a suggestion. We think it's a good one, but by no means is that one the hard and true reality that everyone needs to abide by. So go with what works for you. And then lastly, and this is I think most key, how and when the data must be submitted and reported both to your employees and to the IRS. And I was saying to someone outside, Casey, we had a conversation in preparation for today. I was going through my presentation slides with a lawyer, with an ERISA attorney, just to make sure that everything I said was up to snuff. And I just stopped for a moment and said, this is unbelievable that we have gone in such a direction that you now need to vet these things with attorneys just to make sure that what you are delivering is accurate. And that's how complicated our world has gotten. So if you feel a little adrift, I think that's our new normal. And we all just need to kind of look towards each other for collective guidance. And my favorite part is I'll show you the 1094C and the 1095C, and you'll see right across it, draft. So even the actual document that I'm telling you that you're going to need to abide by at the end of next year is still in a draft form. So we'll see. Interesting times in which we live. Okay. Before we get into measurement periods and the compliance with the data, etc., just a step back, a real quick step back. These are, in any webinar I've sat through, in any piece of material that I have read, these are terms that are thrown out. And they're going to be part of our new lexicon, things like MECs, ALEs. You'll see them all over the place in this code that we live in. Well, I just wanted to really quickly check the box as to what those meant so that we're comfortable with this vernacular. And these are just some of the things that have been bandied about. The first one you'll see is not on this slide, ALEs, applicable large employers, and that's you. It's a large employer above the size of 50. So if you ever see it in parentheses, you'll find it frequently. An ALE must do this, an ALE must do that, and you're thinking to yourself, well, what is that exactly? It's you, a large employer above 50, all right? They'll talk about MECs, this minimum essential coverage. And a minimum essential coverage would be a plan that has 60% of actuarial value. And you could go and find these tables that will tell you if your plan meets those standards, but you don't have to, because the plans that are offered amongst the Pays-Boa consortium of schools do. So every plan that is in the spectrum of offerings is well in excess of the 60% actuarial value. But if you ever see that phrase and you wonder what that meant, it's that AV table, that actuarial value table. Okay. The affordability test is the next one, the minimum value affordability piece to it. Now this one is an interesting one. The affordability test has been thrown out there to say, you as an employer, you must have a plan in place which meets a certain financial need of your employees. And this is one that I know, because I've had conversations with some of you, has caused you concern. I think you don't need to be as concerned as you might be right now, because if you employ the simple math, you'll find that all of the plans have easily passed the affordability test. What it means is the single contribution for your lowest tiered plan can't be in excess of 9.5% of a person's household income. Household income. You wouldn't know that. You would only know what you are issuing on a W-2. So the affordability test said they don't want employers to be offering a plan but then say to the employees, yep, that's $300 a month to be on that plan, and therefore not be at all affordable. So if an employer offered a plan which didn't meet this test, an employee would go to the exchange and get coverage, and the employee would inevitably get a subsidy for the plan, which would then trigger the IRS to come to you and say that's a $3,000 fine. Okay? But look at the math that I use there. So if you have a person who's making $18,000 a year, and you take that 9.5% of salary and you divide it by 12, you're looking at $140 a month to be on that plan. I know the contribution levels at all the schools. I study them, and no one is anywhere near that. Nowhere near it. Because again, it's not the richest plan, it's the single level of your lowest plan option. And I have had conversations with people that have eked up towards the bubble, but it was never a secondary school or a college. It was kind of these lower elementary schools, and they wanted to kind of put these plans in place just to check a box, and they said it's not really affordable, let's reconfigure. But for you, it's a moot point. And I can say that looking at everybody in the room and everybody online, your plans are robust, and no one is charging $142 a month to be on the lowest base plan. All right, but that's what that means, and if you ever saw that affordability question come up and you're concerned, I would ask you to allay your fears, because you're all well within the bands of compliance. All right? Now, let's get into the definitions that's going to start this whole narrative for what you need to be considering for 2015 in preparation for 2016. The first is, are you a large employer? And we all know that you are. The definition of a large employer is anybody who's going to have 50 full-time or full-time equivalents. And that's actually a combination of part-time and full-time. So if I have 40, Matt, could you give Saf and Anna a copy of that? Sorry, I can't leave the microphone. If you have 40 full-time, you think, well, I'm under that threshold, I'm okay. But if you have 20 part-time, that goes into the mix and counts against you, so that would put you over. So this is for all of our large employers. And by law, the Affordable Care Act says, if you are a large employer plus 50, you must offer your full-time employees benefits, and you must have access to benefits. If you don't, you're not in compliance. So two things. What's large? 50 plus. The second thing, what's full-time? 30 hours. Now, the 30 hours provision, that was the one that has just actually come back up into the news. Congress and the Senate are now GOP controlled. And there are two acts now that are making their way towards the White House that would say we'd like to move that 30 up to 40. People are looking at that saying, boy, is that going to come to pass? That would be good for us. I think, this is my own position, that you have a better chance of seeing the face of God and living than you see 30 going to 40. Why? because Obama's already said he'll veto it. And to overrule a veto, you need a supermajority. So, yeah, the Senate does have the majority of GOP control, but it doesn't have a supermajority. You need 2/3. And they don't have that. So I don't see that happening where the 30 becomes 40. That would be wonderful. I just don't see it happening. Okay? Stranger things have. That's my position. Okay? So that being taken into consideration, all employers must start to look at their employees to say, am I giving benefits to that person who I had previously dubbed or deemed part-time, working 32 hours, 35 hours, because I saw full-time is 40. And if that was the case, you're seeing people ratchet that down. It's not, I don't think, too prevalent in academia, but at some of these employer groups that we've seen in the news, such as Darden Industries, which is Red Lobster and fast food restaurants, they had people who were working 32 hours who were not benefit eligible. And what they did was they just dumped them all down to 28 hours. So therefore they don't, by law, have to offer them benefits. They just have to monitor, making sure that those people don't go above that number. Okay? So you're large if you're above 50. You're full-time if you're above 30. Now the question is, well, thank you for that data. When do I start tracking these people? And the answer to that question is now. Now. January 1, 2015, we started to have this onus to begin gathering and collecting the data in a real material fashion, because we are going to need to take the data from January 2015 through December 2015, and that will have to be supplied to our employees in January 2016. So the question is, when do we collect it? And then the next question is, how? Okay? So let's take a look at that. The how really depends upon whatever provisions you have in place currently to monitor your staff. Now, this is academia. You're not having your professors come in and punch a clock, okay? But that isn't required anyway. Your professors and everyone who is currently on your benefits are benefit eligible, and you could then deem them as full-time. So there isn't a real need for you to say, well, they work X amount of hours. You've already given them full-time status, so you can just back that in as full-time equivalent, and that will be fine on the form, which we'll go through, and you'll see I could just say, yes, I've made an offer of coverage to my full-times. It's our employees that are not receiving the benefits that we really need to be mindful of, and those are the employee classes that we have to say, what operations do we have in place right now to track their time accordingly. And that's where we're asking everyone to stop and think to themselves, is there any type of operation in place right now to record that info? Okay? I've broken it up for your purposes into 3 categories. And this is strictly for academia, not for the secondary schools. The first one, the biggest one, adjuncts. So the question is, I am an employer that has, I'll talk to some of you, hundreds of adjuncts floating out there. What do I do with these people? Okay. Well, the guidance came out from the Department of Labor that said you could put this widget in there of 2.25 hours. So the 2.25 was used as a reasonable guidance for higher education institutions, and you apply that math to come up with your hours per week or hours per month for your adjunct staff. Now, I give the example down at the bottom. And if I have an adjunct professor who teaches 3 classes a week, and those classes meet 3 times a week, so it's your Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they teach a 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and a 12 o'clock class. That's the supposition that I'm using here, okay? The total number of hours there is 9, but it's not 9. That's in class time. So it's 9 times 2.25. If you do that, you can see that 9 times 2.25 equates to 20.25 hours. And you have plenty of margin there before you've hit 30 and have to offer them benefits, right? Here's the problem. I have heard from some institutions that adjuncts are teaching 6 classes, or they're teaching 4 classes, and then they're helping out with some program here which counts as work, and they're tutoring there, and that counts as work. So all told, they very well may be at that 30-hour mark, and that makes them full-time, and that makes them benefit eligible. And if you had a whole host of them at some of these institutions that we have 500 adjuncts, if a whole pack of them were above 30 hours and were to go to the exchange and get the coverage with a tax subsidy, then you would be receiving a knock on the door from Health and Human Services saying that you're in violation, and they would apply that fine of $2,000 times the number of full-time employees. So that's the penalty provision. And the math, again, is 2.25 for adjuncts. And therefore, all academic institutions in the higher ed space have to start in January saying, I have X many adjuncts teaching X number of classes per semester, and that number through 12 months aggregates to what average. And if you have 6 classes, 4 classes, and other programs, you have to get your hands around that total math. Yes? No. Great question. The question is, if the tutoring is existing, is that 2.25? No, that's 1 hour. That's a unit of work, 1 hour. Correct. And what they said was there is time for prep and marking, maybe office hours, etc. And that's in that composite 2.25. So it's not just that hour of in-class teaching. It's more than that. Now, Bill, I'll say this to you because we talked about this. So the art institutions, such as University of the Arts, Moore College of Art and Design, and Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, you have studio sessions. And when we looked into this, because the studio session encompasses all of the work, it does not get a 2.25 affixed to it. The 2.25 supposes that there was pre-work done, but from our conversation, the way that I framed this out was all of the work and all of the correspondence with the students happens within the bookends of that 6-hour studio time. And the same with, there wasn't anyone here, but there was labs at some institutions. So the sciences, the labs, they said that that 4-hour lab is not 4 times 2.25 because the work is being done that would otherwise be supposed outside of that 1-hour unit of class time. Yes? No. The question is if you have a nursing adjunct monitoring students, that function is like tutoring. It's a work function that will be based upon the hour of time worked. This definition applies solely to in-class teaching time. So if they're in front of a classroom presenting, they've made a supposition that there was prep work involved to get ready for that class and post-class work involved with meeting with students and grading, etc. So they've given it that bumped up number. Outside of that, such as tutoring, such as monitoring, those would be affixed to, I spent 2 hours of monitoring time with the nursing students. That's 2 hours, not 2 times 2.25.
John, I know the 2.25 is safe.
Yes.
So has there been anything in writing to tell us that the one-to-one studio classes, is that safe harbor? Is that
yeah.
Continued, or is that just our position?
It's our position. There has not been from the Department of Labor, Department of Treasury, or Health and Human Services any clarification other than the safe harbor of 2.25. So we have to operate under the best opinion option right now.
So if we're going to get audited, I have no idea how the audit process works.
Right.
I guess they would come and they would say that there's a time of 2.25 and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be defended. The reason behind the one we want.
Correct.
That's the position, but
the government does what the government does. Correct. So, yeah, the question is, if an audit was to happen, and the audit, by the way, would have to be triggered by, in year 1, you have a 30% corridor of people, applying for exchange coverage and getting those subsidies. So there's a gigantic corridor for error. In year 2, it goes to 95%. And that's illustrated on the slide coming up. So you still have a corridor of error there. But, should that come to play, I do believe that you have a very defensible position. And there's so much gray here, Bill. This 2.25 is the safe harbor. This adjunct question is now almost 24 months old, and it has never really been officially nailed down in any of the IRS guidelines. They said this is a reasonable safe harbor position to take. But it was never been nailed down.
Right.
It's incredible, right? You're welcome. So that's what we have to take into consideration with the adjuncts. And what we have seen is the higher ed institutions simply getting tighter on the classes allowed. We've read this anecdotally. There has been this really nice narrative that we see in the news that says, oh my God, look what Obamacare's done. It's made all these poor adjuncts go out there and they've lost all these classes as a result. So every time it happens, I have a Google alert that pops up and there's another community college that did it, etc. But this is what these institutions have been forced to do, simply abide by the confines of the law. We're just asking that you be mindful of the confines and work accordingly within them. The next issue, the coaches. This was an interesting one because we had heard, and I guess I should have assumed this, but I never really thought about it, that there were certain classifications of coaches that simply just wouldn't leave campus. They just wanted to coach 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But they weren't benefit eligible because they weren't the head coach. They were maybe the graduate assistant who was the third-tier part-time coach for the basketball program or the lacrosse team. And if you looked at them for a 2 or 3 month period, they were working 60 hours a week, 80 hours a week. And if the team was doing particularly well, that could really pose a problem because you have a person here or a class of individuals who are going to make you susceptible to a potential fine. What we found was the second block there. For your professors, you can't use academic breaks against them. And an academic break would be the summer. For coaches, you can. And I don't want to say that you're using this against them, but a coach isn't afforded the same opportunity as an academic. And so therefore, if I have a coach who is working those 80-hour weeks for a 4-month period of time, if I took a 12-month snapshot of that individual, they might have a lot of hours during the in-season time, but in the off-season time, which could be another 6 months, they might be working very, very little to none at all. And that gets calculated in the total, which you would then use at the year end to say, full-time benefit eligible or not. And again, the math would be 30 hours a week or 130 a month on average or not. And I think that if you use that math, you find, I feel for the vast majority, they would fall under the 30 hours a week, under the 130 hours a month. You just have to look at the total 12 months, not a 6-month period where 4 of those months were heavy in-season coaching. Okay? Yes, Colleen? So the question is, are the calculations for adjuncts affected by accelerated programs of 15 weeks or any type of manipulation of how much time that they're taking? Colleen, the answer to that is no. The in-class time gets the 2.25 calculation. And what we'll talk about, I think in maybe 1 or 2 slides, is how an institution sets up its measurement period to capture the total data. That's the key. And when an institution fixes that measurement period, if they're prudent, then it doesn't matter how many classes they're teaching, etc., because the aggregate math is going to work out so that the adjuncts and the coaches and whomever that are currently non-benefit eligible aggregate out and remain in those categories. All right. Student workers were the other category of potential problems for institutions in higher ed. Student workers, however, per the red, are considered federal work-study program employees, therefore not eligible for that subsidy and therefore not necessarily a threat for a penalty for higher ed institutions. So that's good news. One thing that I didn't put on here that you need to consider is that if you have student workers who are not federal work-study, you have to monitor that. You could have a sophomore in the library who's not federal work-study program, and if that kid is working their tail off, that's an employee, and you have to be mindful of that. So this is just that broad brush of federal work-study, which we all know, but if that other category exists out there, you need to be mindful of it. Yes?
So we're also trying to monitor so that they know that all of the 20 hours.
Right. So Sue from Cabrini, for those online, has mentioned that the work study has been cut back, and what they're doing is monitoring those that are getting work study as well as just random hours from Cabrini and keeping that to under 20 hours, which is, I think, very, very prudent. So the graduate assistants that are getting compensated depends on that definition of work. It's one of these other, like the art studio classes. For these particular classes, they have said that that's a unit of 1 hour. Yeah. And Sue, I did read something about that, and I actually have the article here, which I'll share with everyone. It's the NACUA Notes, National Association of College and University Attorneys, and this was their opinion paper that they put out in May of 2014 that I relied on, and it did mention grad students. I just didn't include it in this. I'll send this out, though, and follow up on that point because I think it's an important one. You're welcome. Okay. So why are we doing all this tracking? Why are we collecting all this data? It's because of the penalty provision for the pay-or-play mandate, which said that if you're a large employer, you needed to give these full-time employees benefits, and if you didn't, you were made subject to the penalty provision. And that penalty provision is the $2,000 per head for all of your full-time employees, less the first 80 if you have over 100. So that was a significant fine for a lot of people. You have, I don't think, any intention of dropping your benefits. So imagine if, SOF at University of the Sciences had just an accidental oversight of data, and a few of his adjuncts went to the exchange and got the coverage, and now they're staring down the barrel of 2,000 times 700. That's a significant fine that no one would be able to absorb, and so we all need to be mindful of it, because if it was to come to fruition, that could be incredibly damaging to any institution in here. I don't think that anyone has the reserve fund for the pay-or-play mandate of $1.5 million. The phase-in for it, though, as I mentioned to Bill, is nice. This gives some breathing room. Initially, when this came out, it wasn't really clearly defined. So there was suggestion that if you had 2 or 3 professors or adjuncts or coaches go to the exchange, that could trigger the fine. Well, then they said, no, give a 5% corridor. And then they came out with transition relief to say, we'll actually give you a 30% corridor in year 1, and then a 5% corridor in year 2. So I think the administration recognized this is a huge problem. Their intent was to make sure that employers offer coverage. That's fine. The devil was in the details, and when they realized the rollout of this thing was going to be problematic, they gave breathing room. So the breathing room is, if we were to get to the end of 2015 and you had adjuncts and coaches, et cetera, that you just did not do a good job of tracking and they were to go to the exchange, if you did the math on your total population, it would have to be sizable, that went, got the coverage and a subsidy in excess of 30% of your population. That they would be going in droves. So I'm not really sure that's going to happen, but in year 2, for 2016, then it moves down to 5% corridor. That becomes a little bit more realistic, and I think that we just need to do our due diligence, find out who these people are, how much are they actually working, and track all of that so that we avoid the problem of the fine. Okay? And it's not like you actually have an option of tracking. It's something you have to do. So we're going to employ certain standards to make sure that everybody does it. How would the penalty actually be applied? Well, in the guidelines, it's going to be the following. They would say to an employer group, we found that you have this penalty applied, and we would like to review it with you. You get all the data, and you're able to go through it, make an objection, defend your position, and then if you have an indefensible position, then the penalty is applied. But you do have a recourse there, so it's not an automatic, lien on your accounts. They do have a process flow for which you can certainly have some type of recourse. All right? Okay. Back to who is the full-time employee. It's a person who is reasonably expected at date of hire to be working 30 hours a week or 130 hours a month. These people, if they are meeting that standard, are by definition eligible for benefits. So let's do this. Let's just take a pause, because I found we've done this, I think this is probably the third time we've had this conversation, and I see a look in people's eyes. It's despondent, I think would be the best word. And you're thinking to yourself, like, I don't know what we're going to do. Here's the reality, though. You make a decision when you hire your employee as to whether they're benefit eligible or not. What I know about the higher ed space is the vast majority are benefit eligible full-time. And the or nots, you're very clear on their definition. These people working 15 hours a week, 20 hours a week, that's their role. They're not eligible for benefits, and we're okay there. It's the gray area. So let's focus on the real problem. The problem is this gray area. You hire a person, and you want them to work 25 hours a week, but sometimes they work 32 hours a week, and then it's down to 18, and then it's up to 40. It's all over the map. So the role that you hired them for was not clearly defined at date of hire. Their classification is called a variable hour employee. And at the day of hire, you said to them, you're not eligible for benefits right now because you don't meet our definition of full-time. But we're going to monitor you through a measurement period. And if over the course of that measurement period, we find that you do work more than 30 hours a week or 130 hours a month, you will be given access to benefits. That's the law, and it's that class of employees, this variable hour employee, you really need to fixate in on. That despondent look, I think, came from confusion as to who you needed to focus in on. And if you break it up into two pieces, I found that was easy to comprehend. Our full-time benefit eligibles, we don't have to worry about them. They're not a problem. The others that are clearly classified as 15 to 20 hours, we don't have to worry about them. We'll leave them aside. It's that gray area. Can you get your hands around them? And when you realize that it's just that population set, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the problem became much more manageable because the population set became much smaller. 25 to 32 hours, you didn't give them benefits, now you have to watch them. Helen?
So the measurement period is really the low back.
Well, so now we're getting into semantics, and here's what we'll do. Ta-da! Oh, okay. Let me get into the measurement period with Helen in a second, but Casey, go ahead.
So let's say you hire someone in January.
Yes.
They're working 30 hours.
Yes.
There seems to be a distinction between the new hire and the existing employees. Are they effective 60 days from the new hire, or are they effective from the new hire?
Okay. You hired a person and they're working 30 hours. The question is, you hired a person, they're working 30 hours. When do you have to give them benefits? Well, by law, 30 hours is full-time benefit eligible. You are able to give them a 60-day waiting period before you put them onto the benefits. So you hired them January 1, you've got them put them onto the benefits 60 days from January 1. Okay? Now, let me change your question, and I'll answer Helen's question with this. You hired a person and they're working 25 hours a week. So you didn't give them benefits. So you don't have to hold to a 60-day period there, Casey and Helen. What you would do is you put them into a measurement period. Now the measurement period, Helen, you had mentioned the look-back measurement period. So let's go through how this all works out. The measurement period is your, I just use this phrase time and time again, it helps me conceptualize it. It's your snapshot, your Polaroid picture of how much work was done by an employee for a specific chunk of time. And you set up that measurement period for, again, that variable hour employee who's working 25 hours. And you say, you're not eligible for benefits, but we're going to watch this over a section of time. And after that section of time, we'll review how many hours you worked. And then we'll make a determination as to, are you on the benefits or not? So if you look at the calendar that I used here, This is one that we have proposed in the past. It just seems to make sense. You don't have to use this, but this one has a logic to it. It's a 9-month measurement period. Now this would involve, Helen, per your definition, a small piece of a look back, because we're standing here at the end of the month. So you would have to say, for all those people that were hired in January, let's take a look at the last 30 days, but basically your snapshot picture is how much work was accomplished, and again, 30 hours a week, 130 a month, from January until the end of August, 9 months. Now, you're able to use 3 months, 6, 9, 12, can't go longer than 12. I'm saying 9 here. Then you're able to apply what's called an administrative period. It can be as long as 3 months. I would say use 2. You're going to need to know, based upon the data, what the averages are. You don't need necessarily 2 months, but why I'm saying 2 months is because at the conclusion of the 2, you're right at our open enrollment. So there's a logic to it that you would say, as an institution, we'll use this 9-month measurement, 2-month admin. The benefits would go live on November 1st, 2015. Now at that point, you are in the stability phase. And the law says you have to give the benefits for as long as the measurement period was. So this is where it gets bizarre. You could, by law, give them benefits just for 9 months in the next plan year. So they'd start in November, and then 9 months into it, they'd come off. I would think that that would be bizarre. So I'm just using my own logic here and do what you need to do. But I would assume that using a 12-month plan year might be a little bit more sensical. Here's the thing, though. You've given one measurement period. That's your snapshot. Okay? Click. And so-and-so is working 32 hours on average, so therefore they're eligible for benefits in November 2015. But let's say during the November, December, January period, that job classification changed a little bit. They went down to 15 hours. Doesn't matter. You have to still give them benefits, because in the measurement period from January 15 to August 31, 15, they were full-time based on your math. So therefore, in the stability period, you've got to give them benefits. Even if they go down to 0 hours, they are benefit eligible by law. The other thing that becomes complicated is you have to restart a new measurement period. So you have closed one out, given the benefits, but now you have to reset the clock and do it again and again and again. And this is the part where business managers say, I'm going to look for another job. So again, you set up the measurement, you run it, put it in admin, apply the stability, and what we would hope would happen is we develop a coherent cycle of operation where you take a 12-month, you put it in an admin, and then you go with the next year. Casey. You were just, okay, so the question is, if you're applying this with faculty contracts, which run from January through the end of this first semester, mid-May, how does this work in conjunction with you setting up a 9-month? No, but this is where I find we sometimes may get confused. Your faculty, are they benefit eligible? Okay, so for your part-time affiliates, they get a contract, and that contract is for that chunk of time. All right. Yeah, you would be forced to use a 9-month measurement on these people, and that would be written into your plan document to say that at Eastern, our measurement period runs from X to Y, and the employee's time is calculated on that if they are a variable employee, which that class sounds like they are. Yes, Helen? Okay, question is when, if you have a person who's working plus 30 hours, when are they eligible for benefits? And the answer is November 1. Because while this provision of pay or play mandate went into effect in 2015, it's aligned with the plan's anniversary date, and we are 11/1. So you have some room. Yes, Mark. You should put it in your plan document. So that's the measurement in the stability period, and I feel like this is the greatest cause of concern for people. And even if you understand it, okay, which is difficult because if you look at this next slide where I kind of show the hopscotching of, you know, you've got your look-back measurement period, your admin, and your stability in red, and it resets and it keeps going. And it just becomes maddening. I don't think that we need to perseverate on how the heck are we going to do this, right? Because if you think you're going to do this with, I don't know, a spreadsheet, a ledger, that's not going to happen. Technology must be employed to relieve you of this burden, which is why I had to have Business Solver, and Janine will jump on the call in a moment. I had to have them in this conversation, right? Because you simply couldn't physically track all of these hours of your employees and meet the regulations that are now put upon everybody. I just kind of laugh thinking of like Joanne, you know, over at Haverford. Yeah, I'm not going to go home tonight because I've got to go through my ledger here. Oh, there's one adjunct over there we've got to keep an eye on because, good Lord, we did a lab. So what we're going to ask Business Solver to do in a moment is jump in and say what tools are available from their toolkit that would help you meet the compliance, but also free yourself up of the penalty provisions because they'll be doing this on a technological background. Therefore, you don't worry about it. It's kind of one of those set it and forget it methodologies. Sorry, I didn't even use that phrase. But.
So when you have your possible method for the measurement and admin and stability, if you use that, when does that measurement period start?
As soon as the administrative period is over.
As soon as the administrative period is over?
Mm-hmm.
A month, 3 months. How's that been done? You said you want to do what 30 hours or more.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There's never been a measurement period to get there.
Yep.
So you don't have to offer them insurance for the first.
Correct. So it's a part-time employee, and they're working in a contained corridor of time. They're called a seasonal employee. You have a 4-month corridor. And just to help you remember this, in the regulations, they call them ski instructors, right? Because you have these ski instructors who are working their tail off November, December, January, February, but then ski season's over and they go away. So the mountain that hires them doesn't have to offer them benefits. And they also call them holiday employees at Macy's. That bum rush of activity, but then they're done. So you can hire them. You don't have to make an offer of coverage because you know that this is only going to be a seasonal employee, and then they're done, not an annual type of enterprise.
4 months or less.
Correct. Casey. It applies to temps too. So if they exceed 4 months, now you have to take into consideration, all right, I have a variable employee. Yes, now you have to monitor that time over that period. And that's going to be one of these things where, you know, we're setting a measurement period set up on January 1st. You might have hired this person in February or March, but you could say in your plan documents that we're using a measurement period of 9 months. So you'd have to start a new one for each new hire, you know, in March for 9 months, and in April for 9 months, and in May for 9 months. So it kind of trickles out from there. And that is another type of scenario where Patty McHugh, if she's on the call, would go bonkers at Eastern if she had to track all this stuff. And it's impossible to do so, frankly. It's impossible to do so. When I saw this and I started to think, okay, well, that's nice and clean, but that assumes that no one gets hired at your institution, which is not the case. There'll be people coming on all throughout the course of the year, and each time they come on and they're a variable employee, you need to set up a new measurement period. and bump it out and bump it out and bump it out. So that's impossible for a human being to do. That's where you apply a software from either a payroll vendor or we'll talk to Business Solver in a moment, and you would plug these people's hours in, and they'd actually plug them themselves. And over the course of that measurement period, which has been preordained by you, then they would get a notification as to whether they're eligible for benefits or not. And you have set that on autopilot and relieved yourself of that worry.
Can you talk about, I guess when people go to government service not be eligible, and so you have the new hire, starting in January 68, they become eligible to start the measurement period the same measurement period, they already thought, but they're in 40 well. They're not working in 40 days. Can I drop them off, or do I have to keep them on?
When you hire them, were they hired as full-time benefit eligible or variable?
They're hired as 30, but they're not working.
You need to give them benefits. The day to hire, you gave them benefits. You can't then pull them back unless you decided to reclassify them as now a variable employee. You don't. Right. Well, so you had said that you would hire a person who was going to be working 30 hours. You knew that was locked in. That's a full-time employee. If you wanted to scale that back and say 28 hours, now it's variable, and you don't have to make an offer of coverage for 28.
Well, no, they're scheduled for it, but they're not working. So we have people who are scheduled for it, but because they're out of leave, oh, 28.
You need to get more out of them. You can, but what you'd have to do is go back to the date of hire and classify them not as full-time benefit eligible, but as variable at that time of hire. And the offer would indicate as much. And it would be very clear to say, no, you're not benefit eligible. We're classifying you as variable. We'll monitor you through the admin period. I'm sorry, the measurement period. And then determine it at the end of that. Yes?
Now, registry is over, but it looks like to me that you have to offer the benefits to the first, right?
Correct.
Whether or not you go as on the one back, it's going to be a part of it. You're not offering the contract. So you can
Terminate them.
so you have to
Yeah.
If it's not in the back, then you cannot offer it.
Correct. So this is assuming that they're staying on the plan and employed at the employer. If you found that they were lousy and you let them go, then goodbye. We'll send them a COBRA notification.
So if you offer them the new contract, you have to.
Abide by the measurement period and the stability period. Correct. Good question. All right. Well, now we can get into the meat and potatoes, as if that wasn't enough. What I want to do here, guys, is I'm actually going to walk you through a 1095-C and a 1094-C. If you're able to get through this without your eyes rolling around in your head, you're amazing. Because this is IRS code 6055 and 6056. And out of 6055 and 6056 came the 1094B and the 1095B and the 1095C and B. So there's so much information out there now that you just kind of just sit back in your chair and say, dear Lord. But here's what it's asking you to do. Okay, and I realize the screenshots that you have in your handouts are difficult to read, but you can Google the 1094C and the 1095C, and they're right there. It will say draft, do not file on there. I've actually had, who asked me that question? Someone asked me just recently. Sop had someone's accountant say, give us the 1095C. I said, I will, next year. That's when they're due. They're due January of 2016. This person is really, really prepared, aren't they? Well done. So you can pull these up and you can kind of see what is being asked of employers to complete, and you'll send one into the IRS and you'll send one out to the employees, and it's going to say to the IRS what was the level of coverage, what was the cost, what were the hours, and we'll say to the employee similar information. To the employee, if their verification, there was an offer of coverage and to what value. To the IRS, well, they need data. If you have an adjunct go to the exchange and get the coverage and say it wasn't affordable at their employer, how does the IRS substantiate that? You're substantiating that. You're the data feed. So you're going to be giving them the information that they're going to then ultimately use as a check and balance when your employee comes for coverage through the exchange and tries to get a subsidy. So this is what you're doing. On the 1095-C, on Part 1, very self-explanatory. It's just asking for the information about the employer, and you're going to put that in, and then the employee on the left-hand side. Very simple, very self-explanatory. In Part 2, it asks, was there an offer of coverage? And was that coverage affordable? And did it have minimum essential? So for all of your full-time employees, the answer is yes, yes, and yes. Right? It's for the variable employees that you'd be saying no. And all this information is available via code. The next box is the monthly premium for the single level at the least expensive plan. And this is the affordability test. A person can come to the exchange and say the coverage at Cabrini is unaffordable, and they have the backup supplied to the exchange by Ann and Sue at Cabrini, because they would have had to submit this. The applicable safe harbors, there are many of them, but none of them are really germane to these schools. But you can look at all the safe harbors that exist for all the different classes, and you'll be able to plug those codes in there if you wanted to extend your filing deadlines, etc. And then lastly, for self-insured plans, there's Section 3 of this form where you have to supply information, but because we're a fully insured plan, that is not relevant. So that's your 1095-C. Fairly simple. But again, let's think about the day-to-day work that you have already on your desks. And now let me add a form that you have to complete for 500 employees with all of your free time. Doable? Not really. So what we'll try and find out is an answer to that particular problem. The 1094. Similar in layout, the top section, Section 1, that's your employer ID information. So you're going to be putting all the information in here about Moore College of Art and Design, Eastern University, etc. EIN numbers, all this is rather easy to accomplish. The employer identification information for the member groups, that's going to say, who is on this plan, and it's going to be the information about the actual group coverage from Blue Cross or whomever. Okay? And then this last section, Section 22, this is where it gets interesting. This is the certification for eligibility. Now, if you see down there, I doubt you can see it on your handouts, but if you can see it on the screen, it actually has A, B, C, and D. What's interesting about those options is there's an option, option D, which is called the 98% offer method. Why I thought this was interesting is because it's an easy pass. It's a checkbox that allows you as an employer, if this is relevant, to say, I make an offer of coverage to 98% of my staff. And if you do that, then you don't have to go and complete name by name by name, level by level by level. You can attach a census and say, yes, 98% of these people are given an access to coverage. Eligible people. And I saw that as a real sweet spot. Now, it's not relevant for everybody because I have already heard, there's a number of people that have these classes that falls well outside of 98%. But seeing that they're making the provision in there, it's certainly something we want to explore, the 98%. Okay? Back page of this is all of the full-time employees and their counts by month. So you would have to go in line by line by line, and you'd have to articulate the coverage levels by months for each one of these. It's overwhelming. And it goes back to the point that I was making that there has to be a software solution here. If there isn't, and you're doing this by hand, so I had a conversation with a payroll vendor, and they said, this form, the 94, will make business officers and human resource people across the country quit. You just give up. It's impossible to do. It's an impossible task. So we'd have to find a software solution that's going to plug this information in for us and make us compliant, so we're okay there, but also relieve us of this incredible duty which the government has forced on us. So what I'm going to do is I just only have 2 slides left, and then I'm going to have Janine Fell from Business Solver jump in and talk about the solutions that they provide. The data collection is actually not until next year. So you'll take the entire year of time to collect all this information, January 2015 through the end of the year, December 2015. And then, just like your W-2s, you'll be supplying this information out to the employees by the end of January 2016. Now, January 31st of 2016, I believe, is a Sunday. So for this year, I think that they allow it to be February 1, 2016. This is going to be in addition to their W-2 that you're currently providing. This is another piece of documentation saying that they were offered eligible coverage, which you as an employer by law must give them, and if not, what was that value of the coverage? So obviously, since the penalty on this is $100 per person for noncompliance, we need to administer appropriately to get all this information collected and sorted so that when it comes to next year, we can plug it in and we can issue out these 1094s and 1095s. If we were to wait, it's an impossible task, right? I had been asked, why aren't we having this conversation earlier? Well, the forms are still in draft. And we also were trying to figure out what we had as a solution strategy for you. So for our purposes, what we wanted to do for today's conversation was say, what are the things you want to concern yourself with? How you should potentially go about working to collect all this information? And then lastly, and I'll turn it over now, what resources exist to assist with this new functionality you guys have to take over? So hopefully Janine is not asleep at her desk, and I'm going to ask Colleen to come over here. What we're about to attempt has never been done before. We are Evel Knievel, jumping the Grand Canyon. Oh, that's a good idea. So we have lunches provided. Why don't we take the technological transition time here for you guys if you'd like to grab your meals. You want to do that? So go ahead and grab, and Colleen and I will work on this. How's my voice?
Janine, do you want to test your microphone? Oh, you know what? I might have to make you.
So, measure this is a separate conversation. We can get us a
Can you hear me now? A little voice just said I was just unmuted. Can you hear me now?
I think I can hear you.
Okay.
Let me see.
I'm right next to the phone, so I don't know if I could get any
I'll need to
louder.
connect you to the big speakers in this room.
Okay.
No, it's the arrow. Yeah. So,
I have to go talk to Jim for him to hook up the.
got it. Hey, Janine, Colleen is going to go check with the AV guy, and he's just getting you wired through the speakers because right now it's not coming through. So for Janine Fell, we're setting that up, and for everybody else who is on the webinar, just give us a minute to transition over so that we can get Janine's presentation live with audio. Thank you.
No problem.
Janine, can you give us a test?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Test, test.
And I have it turned down again, so let me turn it up one more time.
Okay. One moment.
You need another test?
Oh, great. Like voice of God.
All right, so
I think we're good.
hi, Janine.
Hi, hello.
If you want to meet us, you can do that.
No, I won't. How do I go full screen on that?
So she has
A little echoey on my side. Hopefully you're not hearing the same.
Okay, Janine, we're going to mute.
Okay. Should I go ahead and get started, though?
I'm unmuting myself to tell Janine. Let me introduce Janine. Everyone in the room and anyone online, thank you still for sticking with us here. So Janine Fell is our day-to-day operations person at Business Solver. She's been just tremendous at setting this whole thing up. If you knew, if you knew the level of contact Janine Fell had with Matt Doyle, Andrea Doyle, Katie Sillip, Jackie Jambochin in our office, it's preposterous. But thanks to her and her team, we were able to have that seamless transition during open enrollment. You know, everyone got ID cards, bills showed up the way that they were supposed to without too much hiccup, and it was remarkable, and a lot of it was attributable to Janine Fell. So what we asked Janine to do is give us this demonstration today of what Business Solver has on its back end that could assist with the data tracking, with the measurements periods, and just the overall compliance. So she'll go through that with us. Janine, I'm gonna mute it, but if there's a question that comes up from the room, I'll unmute it and I'll ask you to weigh in. Just because it's echoey though, I'm gonna mute out and I'll let you go from here. Okay?
Thank you. All right. Well, hello, everyone. I also have Jennifer Lane in the room with us. She's your client relationship manager and works very closely with ADC as well. And ADC was a big part of getting all your data that we got from Blue Cross and Delta Dental into our system. So what I have up on the screen right now is our just kind of a summary of what we've done so far for ACA reporting and also the variable hours tracking. So just to give you an overview of what Business Solver has done over the last year and a half is we have a team that works very closely with our IT developers, looking at the requirements and the legislation as it's updated, you know, on a very regular basis, as I'm sure you're aware. So we've been monitoring that. We've also been building out our database to accommodate things that weren't previously in our system for variable hours tracking, and then also for the reporting that's due next year. We've also had probably 4 or 5 webinars specifically about this topic that I know John has been on several of those, and we actually have recordings of them. So specifically with the hours tracking, I'm going to take it at a very high level today, but we do have that recording available if you want to see really the nitty-gritty details of our system for hours tracking. And then another thing we've been specifically looking at is how do we accommodate our associations. Business Solver has a lot of clients that are direct, large clients, maybe 5,000 employees with one HR team. My team works strictly with associations, so we're trying to figure out over the last several months how do we accommodate our technology to make sure 20 different schools at PAYSBOA can still take advantage of the technology, but have different setups and have different measurement periods if they wanted to do that. So we have to be keeping a close eye on that, and John has actually has also been very helpful moving things along as we talk about these items. So I'm going to start with the variable hours tracking, and I'll put my screen in a little bigger mode so you can see here. Let's see, slideshow. So just to give you an idea of what our system looks like, many of you might be in there adding new hires or terminating people, adding dependents to coverage. So you might have seen a screen like this before, maybe not with this graphic over here, but some of you might have seen an employee record before. So you see the name, the SSN. This is just some dummy data on this particular screenshot. So this is what a member record looks like in our system. When it comes to variable hours tracking in our solution, there were a couple other fields that we needed to build out on the member record. And for PAYSBOA, you don't see those fields today, but we are able to turn them on fairly quickly. So some of those new fields, you'll see date of hire, date of termination. You already have that available. But the newer ones down here under employment information are variable hours, ACA benefit eligible,
date of ACA benefit status, average hours, and then that's really the calculation piece. And I'll show you what the setup screen looks like behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, what you'll want to pay attention to is of all the measurement periods that you have set up and the hours that you're feeding to us on a is this person benefits eligible? And that's what this field is down here, ACA current eligibility. This particular person is not eligible yet. You can see that they're 4 months into their current calculation. So I won't go too much into the details of how the calculations work. Again, there's that Product Council webinar recording that we can provide to you after this call. But you're probably wondering, how do I get this data to Business Solver? And like John said, you might be trying to think of ways to either do it with your payroll vendor or a way to figure it out in an Excel spreadsheet. So let me flip forward to our next slide. This is the setup of it. So this screen you will never see, and it looks a little small on my screen, so hopefully you can see the words that are actually out there. But this is what we would do on our side to set you up. To give you an idea of what structure groups are, each one of the schools today has 3 structure groups. They have COBRA, eligible, and ineligible. So you might have a handful of COBRA people throughout Paisley, but 95% of them are all active, eligible employees. For example, it'd be University of the Arts, active, full-time. Those 3 buckets are out there today. If you were to use Business Solver technology to track variable hours employees, we would add another structure group for you out there called your school name and variable hours. So that's the bucket of people that you're going to be tracking on a regular basis, or we'll be tracking on your behalf. And then the setup of it down here, so we'll pick which schools structure groups are assigned down here, and we can set up different measurement periods by school. And again, John has his recommendation, and I think that's a very good one to keep things consistent with open enrollment. So we would need your initial measurement period, your initial admin period, and your stability period. The setup of this piece is pretty straightforward in our system. This turns on all the calculations to figure out, okay, in this measurement period window, how many hours were worked on average are they now eligible for, in John's example, 11/1 effective date. So that's the setup of it. And one thing, before I go into too much more detail, that we'll want to keep in mind is, and another thing just to clarify, Business Solver is the company. We call our technology Benefit Solver, so benefitsolver.com. Screenshots are what we're looking at right now. One thing to keep in mind, when PaySBOA was implemented, all the data points that we gathered to get your employees in our system came from IBC and Delta Dental. So there will be some population required on your end to get those variable hour people in here so that we can begin to track. So if you've ever added a new hire into our system, it'll be very, very similar to that. You'll go add a new hire, put them in their variable hour structure group, which is on that very first page of adding a new hire, and then they'll automatically fall into that window, or that bucket of people that are tracked. So be keeping that in mind, that as this setup piece is pretty straightforward, getting those employees in the system, you know, some of you might have 20, some might have a couple hundred. We'll have to look at how we want to do that, how to get them in our system. And then, again, when it comes to the volume of variable hour employees that you may have that need to be calculated for 2015, there's 2 different options, and John and I have been discussing the pricing of it, so we'll approach that at the end of the meeting if there's time, talking about the pricing. But there's 2 different ways. Once your variable hour employee is in Benefit Solver, just like all your people that are enrolled in medical and dental, once they're in Benefit Solver, there's 2 different ways to track their hours on an ongoing basis. And one of them is through the import log. So just to give you a little idea of what this screen is, John has access to it because we gave him super system power during implementation. But this export log is actually what we send out to IBC and Delta Dental on a weekly basis. So we send a file with thousands of people and their updated eligibility every week to the carriers. So it's outgoing from our system. We also have the ability to take files like that into our system. So if you had a large population that you didn't want to manually key in the hours every week or every 2 weeks, however often you want to give us that data, we would give you access to use the import tool. And the file that you would put out onto the importer is pretty straightforward. So in this example, this is just one person and the different measurement or periods of time that we're looking at and their hours worked. So you would have a spreadsheet like this that you would give to us. I think most groups are doing it on a weekly basis, some are every 2 weeks. But all that you need on that Excel document is SSN, employee ID, and for Pays Boa, we don't have that. Some of our direct clients have employee IDs that they use for payroll purposes in our system, but we would just default everybody to 100 or maybe even 0 for that field. But SSN, the period begin date that you're looking at for the hours worked during the time period end date, and then ultimately the hours. So that going into our system on a regular basis, and again, this is just one employee's SSN and their time worked, but you would have this out there for, 20 to 200 variable hour employees, however many you have, to import on a regular basis. And this piece right here, although it may sound simple, it will take, maybe an hour and a half training session to make sure you or your HR administrators are comfortable using this tool. Things like the formatting have to be perfect. If the date format of this cell doesn't match what's down here, for whatever reason, maybe the 20 isn't there on your Excel spreadsheet. We'll have the import itself. We have barriers and protection in place so that file would error out, and then we just have to look at the format issue that might be on that file before we import it into our system. So this is the option if you have a large group of people that you need to track. And this one is a little bit more expensive if you want to use the import tool. Just to give you an idea of how Business Solver and the technology works, when it comes to importing things or exporting things, the time it takes us to configure a file, so whether that's a file to IBC or a file coming into us, the data points that we need to grab and sort to populate on a member record, it takes the same amount of time for a 20-life group as it does for a 20,000-life group. So we don't really care about the volume on this spreadsheet, the number of SSNs that you need to track. It's really the configuration that we have to do behind the scenes to get all that data in our system. So another option that we would have instead of the import option is to manually go into a member record every week or every 2 weeks and put that data in the system. If you're going to manually do it, I would recommend doing that on a weekly basis so it's always there. So if you just have less than 10 people and you don't want to pay the full cost of the import tool, this is another option for you. Let's see. Here's an idea of what it looks like on a member record. So if you've ever termed anyone or added a dependent on a member record, see if I can get you a better screenshot. In this drop-down item right here, there's that edit term feature. There's another option that we would populate out there for variable hours tracking. So just like when those buttons pop up for a new hire or birth, open enrollment, there would be a window that would pop up for variable hours tracking. So while you're on the member record, you'd be able to key in that information. And then within the member record itself, you'd be able to view the time tracking if you're ever curious about the history of imports or manually keying that you've done. And then if there's ever a mistake where we have 31 hours here, I must have keyed that wrong. I know that person only worked 15 hours that week. This little checkbox here will allow you to edit that record if you ever need to. And then anytime you touch a member record, we'll always have the history of who did what and when, if you choose to manually update those items. So again, a lot of detail on these slides. I'm trying to keep it at a higher level for you. Again, here's another screenshot of what the member record would look like minus you know, these PowerPoint text in between. The thing we also want to keep in mind about Pays BOA, you know, when we created this technology for a majority of our Business Solver clients, a majority of our Business Solver clients are self-serve, meaning the actual employees at the company are logging into our system. They're doing their qualifying events. They're doing their open enrollment themselves. They're doing their new hire enrollment. The HR admin team at the employer groups are not doing that. In some cases they are, but you know, 90% of our population that's in Benefit Solver has the ability for the employees to go in and key in their own information. So the best thing about this particular tool is that if I'm in my measurement period, I've worked enough hours, I'm going to be eligible for coverage 11-1. Benefit Solver knows it's calculating behind the scenes. On 11-1, it's going to open a window for me. If groups want this option, it will also email me as an employee and say, congratulations, you're now eligible for coverage through your employer. Please go to benefitsolver.com and go through your open or your newly eligible election period. And typically that's a 30-day window that they have, you know, giving November 1st an example, a 30-day window they have to go in and make their elections. So knowing that Pays BOA isn't self-serve, we've had you know, one or two groups moving that direction. We need to think of how can this tracking tool be useful for you. And there are various reports in our system, I don't know if you've had a chance to look, that would allow you, you'd have to run it on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. We also have the option to schedule those reports in case you forget. But we would want you to go to our reports tool, and there's a report called Initial Enrollment Status Report. So if you put a new hire in the system today, forget about variable hours tracking. You just put a new hire, full-time, they're eligible for benefits. That report will show you that they are eligible, they're in their window, and their window ends on this date. So we could set up this tool to work like it does for self-serve, meaning that window opens, but since employees aren't actually going into the system, the report itself that you would have to run would show you, okay, John Mannion, we were tracking him for this time period. We've been importing and keying in his hours. He's now eligible, and I see that because this Benefit Solver report shows me that he's in his newly eligible window. Is everybody still following me? I'll take that as a yes. So that's what the technology would be for Pays BOA, the option to import it. If you're a school that has a high volume, you could import that data. Again, some training along with that. You could key in that data on a recommended weekly basis. But then you'd also have to run that report. And again, you can schedule it, and every time it runs, you get an email. You could schedule it so that you're always looking at it and saying, okay, I see that this person's now eligible. And they're in their window, which means I need to get them their paper application so they can give it back to me, and I can enroll them in whatever IBC or Delta Dental coverage they want.
Janine? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. I have a question.
Okay.
What's the question?
Is there a way to do a math calculation for entering employees into not
Okay, so Janine, the question is how do you do a mass upload? And just so people are clear on that, we sent massive amounts of data from Blue Cross to Business Solver. They uploaded it, and that was everybody's active employees. Since that time, we have on one-off occasions added whole volumes of employees in manually. It's not what you want to do. We've had to do the distinction of having to do it on a couple of instances, but it's much more efficient, obviously, to take a file of variable employees. Let's say University of Arts, we have 500 adjuncts sitting out there. We need to get them into Business Solver. We certainly don't want to hand key them. That's a nightmare. So they exist somewhere. You would scrub that spreadsheet down to the specs that Janine illustrated, and you would upload that. So the question then is, does Business Solver have the ability to accept such a feed? And then I'm going to ask the inevitable follow-up. If so, how much? So Janine, if you could.
Yep, and I just pulled up the Pays-Go Benefit Solver site. So when you say how do they give us a mass amount of data, was that the actual hours spreadsheet with those 5 columns, or are we talking about how do I get my variable hour people in the system to begin with?
Let's do both.
Okay. So if we're talking about getting all the demographic information for those variable hour people, the free way is to key them in by going employees, add a new employee, put in all their demographic information, and again, the structure group would be that new structure group we have to build out. I have access to all of your structure groups, but you would just see your 3 when you go into the system. So just the first one here is Abington. You can see they have an eligible COBRA. There'd be a 4th one called variable hours, or whatever we decide to name it together. So you would add them here, and that's it. You don't have to, they wouldn't be enrolled in any plans or anything like that. They're in the system. That import or that manually keying could start on their record then. The other option would be to import the demographic information, and that's not something we would allow ADC or Pays-Go groups to do, just because there's a lot more data on that type of import file than there is on that 5-column hours tracking spreadsheet. So we would gather, give you a spreadsheet to populate, so first name, last name, SSN, date of birth, date of hire, address, and then that structure group piece. So variable hour employee or full-time, if you wanted to get more people in the system that way too. But there is a charge for that file, and this is just a Business Solver standard outside of the hours tracking and the ACA reporting. If we're importing data into our system, it's typically a $1,500 setup fee for a one-time import to get those variable hour people in. So if you have 200 people that fall in that category, I think that makes sense. Even our standard internally, if I know that there's 50 people that need to get into the system, sometimes admins might key them themselves versus paying for that $1,500 import. But just like I said before, the configuration and work, yeah.
Yeah, these fields right here, just so that you're familiar with this. When we had to add in new employees, you know, because ADC did 3,000 of them in 5 days, it's incredibly easy. I mean, incredibly easy. So in terms of the keying, when you hear keying, you're thinking, oh, dear God, nobody wants to do that. But if you're familiar with how to key on any of the other platforms, this per employee, I would say, takes less than 30 seconds per. So to Janine's point, if you had 50, 75, you could do that manually with your eyes closed. I think what you have to take into consideration is, do you have 500? And then you take a cost equation to say, all right, is that worth $1,500, or could I give that to somebody who could spend the next 5 hours hand keying? Because the data fields, again, are, well, they're all there. They're self-explanatory, and I think it would be fairly accomplishable manually. It's not ideal, but the $1,500 cost we want you to be aware of. All right, thank you, Janine. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. There's going to be a question. Go ahead, Joanne. The question is, on the screen that we're looking at right now, and you can see there's a couple of fields that are not completed, they're not required. One that would be annual salary, right? And at this juncture, it's not necessary. But since we're putting in now variable employee information, which is going to have affordability calculations, et cetera, this is when you want to do the full picture of information. And that's certainly some data fields you're going to want to start supplying. We didn't have to do it in wave one. We didn't have access to the information, and also it wasn't required. But now as we move forward, you're going to want to start, because you can see the payroll frequency, the annual comp, all that's in there. Yeah, you're going to want to start including that info. So Janine, could you do me a favor? So now we know in terms of uploading all of our variable employees to get them into the overall calc. Okay, that's what you'd have to take into consideration. Janine, could you speak a little bit more about the actual costs for the ACA compliance features that you guys had mentioned?
Yep, no problem. And if it's okay with you, I do have a hard stop at, well, 1 o'clock your time, noon my time. I'm getting kicked out of this room. But I'll cover the cost of this, and then we'll jump into the reporting piece for next year, the 1094, 1095, and I'll get those pricings as well. And John, and I just wanted to point out that John and EDC have been diligently asking about pricing. The association pricing can be a little bit tricky on our end just because you're not a direct client. I know a lot about PAYS BOA as an association, but I don't know the individual ins and outs of what each school needs. So that's the reason why the pricing took a little bit longer. I'll let you know on the call today, and then John and I will get a formal email communication out to everyone, hopefully by end of day tomorrow. So the cost for the import itself, just to get the demographic data in if you don't want to key it, not the hours, just the demographic data for your variable hours people, would be that $1,500. That 5-column spreadsheet to import on a regular basis, again, we would give you the ability to do that. Might take an hour of initial training and then probably some questions the first couple months that you're doing it. The cost to set up that import per school would be $2,000 to import on a regular basis, let the system do its magic based on your whatever measurement periods you want to set up. If you don't want to use that import tool, you just want Benefit Solver to set up your requirements for the measurement, whatever months and time periods you want to look at. Just the setup of that and the training we'd have to give you to manually key that information in would be $500. So if you don't have a large population, it probably makes sense to key it in. If you have a large population, it probably makes sense to import it. And that's $2,000 versus $500. And then there's another piece to this as well. Everybody that's in that variable hour bucket, so right now for all of PAYS BOA, there's a per employee per month fee between Business Solver and PAYS BOA. So that's all your active people, and then your COBRA people are treated a little bit differently. For the variable hour bucket that we would have to create, those people would have a 75 cents per employee per month charge. And keep in mind, with the hours tracking and then with the 1094, 1095 reporting that I'm about to go into, since it's really not, since there's so much variance in PAYS BOA schools, colleges, the schools that we'll be talking to next week, it doesn't really make sense to approach this as an association. So we would have to have separate contracts and agreements with schools depending on which service, or if they want both services, we'd have to get those executed as well. So there would be initial calls and fact-finding that we'd have to get from you to populate that, that agreement.
All right, so I jotted it down. I see everybody else did as well. And I just want to reiterate, the initial upload for the variable employees. So we would send a spreadsheet and say, this is the adjunct professors, the assistant coaches, et cetera. They're not benefit eligible, but they're out there. That's a $1,500 charge, okay? If you're going to do the weekly import file, and that's your hours tracking, so you would have a payroll feed, I would assume, where you're manually keying that, to upload that on a weekly basis for those variable employees. That's a $2,000 charge for the imports. If you're not going to do it with, no, per year, one-time setup, per year. If you're going to do it manually, So as opposed to the upload of the file, someone's going to sit there and hand key a $500 charge. But then don't lose sight of this. For the variable hour tracking, and that's them just holding all this information as a repository in the back end and keeping an eye on these people through the measurement and stability period, it's 75 cents PEPM. So do the math there accordingly and figure out, does this make sense? And again, I want to take a step back to say, we wanted today to be positioned as an opportunity to talk about what the issue is, what your responsibility is, and what a resource is. This is the resource, but there are others out there. So your payroll vendors, I'm sure, would have had a conversation about this with you, or if they haven't, they would willingly. And you can do a cost analysis on each one of these scenarios and see what one makes best sense for you. Okay? All right. Now, Janine, what are you going to take us through? I forget.
Now I'm going to take you through some groups call it the 6055, the 6056 reporting. That's really more of the legislation piece. From a technology standpoint, we always refer to it as the 1094 and the 1095. I already kind of went over at the beginning of my presentation what Business Solver has been doing over the last year and a half to get ready for these changes and how we can support our current clients through all of these changes. This PowerPoint is specific about the reporting due January next year. So there are two separate kind of offerings that we're giving you today. It's hours tracking, and now this is the reporting. You don't have to have one to get the other. So the current unknown with the 1094s and the 1095s is, can a TPA, third-party administrator like Business Solver, send on behalf of the employer? And that decision has not been released yet, and we honestly don't have a ballpark idea of when it'll be released. But if we are allowed to, which most consultants that we talk to think that TPAs will be allowed to, just like W-2s, if we are allowed to, we do have a solution that we're already starting to develop for. Now, once we get to the pricing at the end of this conversation, it varies quite a bit, and I just want to let you know that the reason for that is because the exact format and way that this will get transmitted to the IRS, it's unknown what that will look like. So we know that we have all the data points, and we have the ability to through another import type tool for the reporting, get those data points from you. We know that we'll be able to store them, but we don't know the exact format, if we're allowed to transmit it to the TPA, how that will get to the IRS. And there's no timeline that I'm aware of when that will be released either. So that's kind of the reason as a technology company we give ourselves that range, because it could be something completely unexpected where it takes 200 hours of IT development time to accommodate. But we are offering this solution even with the unknowns in place. So what will schools need to provide to populate the 1094 and 1095? We talked about this a little bit earlier, that all we have in the system for you today is the medical elections and the dental elections. So there's a lot of people at your schools that probably aren't in our system. So we would need to make sure that all the people that are benefit eligible get into the system so that they can be on the reporting and get their 1095 for January next year. And then I also have up there variable hour employees. Once they do become eligible, and if you use us for that tracking module, they'll be in our system already. But if you decide to use your payroll vendor for the hours tracking, once they do become eligible, as an admin, you'll know from your payroll company, I need to offer them coverage. Whether they elect or not, they're still eligible, so I need to make sure they get in Benefit Solver so that they can be a part of the 1094 and 1095 reporting. So the pieces of data that we will not have in Business Benefit Solver is these type of people that are in that waive status, they don't have medical or dental right now. We would look at that manually key option, or it'd be the same demographic import with the $1,500 if you wanted to get them in that way. And then lines 14 through 16 on the 1095 that John had up earlier, these lines we wouldn't be calculating in our system, but just like I showed you the ACA eligible and hours worked on that member record, we would have similar fields like fees on the member record in our database. for you to give to us on a regular basis. Now, some associations are looking at, and the exact configuration of this import, what you would give us or be able to import yourself, is unknown right now. Some groups are looking to give it to us on a monthly basis. Others are figuring these out on their own and just going to give us one import at the end of 2015. So the affordability code, which it sounds like you guys won't have an issue with that 9.5%. The line 15 and line 16, we would need to gather that from you and get on member records on a regular basis. And that'll probably be an Excel format with the SSN, the month we're looking at, and those 3 fields above. And most of the time, this shouldn't change for your people, and this would be for your entire population that's in our system. We would need to gather these 3 data points so that we can output it on the forms as we submit them to the IRS. So the option, and this is just a different view that John had up earlier, lines 14, 15, and 16, if you wanted more detail there. If Business Solver is able to transmit as a TPA, we would do it on a per school basis. We'd have to gather your tax ID number, make sure that all those data points, the waived people, the people that become eligible, get into the system whether they elect coverage or not. It's the key is that they're eligible, that they get into our system, and we gather that line 14, 15, and 16 for those people so that we can transmit it to the IRS, assuming we're allowed to. So what I've covered so far is really the transmission piece, which there's some unknowns to, and I can tell you that the cost range for this per school is $5,000 to $10,000. And again, I told you ahead of time there is that range, but that's just because there's so many unknowns of what we'll have to do to our technology to accommodate the unknowns that haven't been released yet. So
Let me just reiterate that, though. So the $5,000 to $10,000, obviously it's loosely laid out at this point because we don't have guidance clearly as to what is going to be allowed or required. But the $5,000 to $10,000 is them collecting and then transmitting this data for you as an institution. So
yep,
just
to be
want to
clear,
sure
that would be a per year service. So after this year, it'll be a set price once we know exactly what it looks like. And then the next year it would be that same price, assuming they don't change anything on us. But the risk that we would take on by transmitting that on your behalf, that would be a per year cost. So we're hoping it's on the lower end, but just in case we get thrown a curveball and have to do a lot more development than we are anticipating, there's that extra cost there. So that's the transmission to the IRS. The other piece that you will be required to do, and John, I'm not 100% sure if the 1095 Cs and Bs are required to go to each employee via mail, or if it can be handed to them or emailed to them. I don't know the exact details around that, but we are also offering the ability, and this is separate of the $5,000 to $10,000 range, offering the ability to send the 1095 directly to your employee on your behalf, so it's one less thing you have to worry about next year. So if we were to mail those forms to your employees, it'd be $1.50 per statement plus postage, just because postage can vary. The nice thing is that form, which will probably be a PDF form, will be available under your member documents. So in that drop-down we were looking at before on Julie's sample record, there you can look at it today. If you've added a new hire or termed anybody, their COBRA notices are out under documents. This would be another document that would be out there for each individual member. So in case they say they didn't receive it in the mail, you can always reference the member documents, and we show when it was printed and when it was mailed, which is usually almost the same day. And then option 2, if you're looking for a little bit of cost savings, is $1 per statement for us to basically give you one large attachment with everybody's 1095 within it. So we would post that for you in the document center in our system. I'll just give you a quick preview of where that's at. So document center is out there today. We would create a folder with just your school's 1095s out there for you to print and send to your employees. Those would also be available under the member record But since we're not printing and mailing them, that detail, that kind of receipt would not be there. So it would be, you know, Arcadia, their folder, a PDF here for them to print out. So any questions on the transmission piece or this is what we call in our terms fulfillment, sending those individual member documents?
I'm scanning the room. It's 12:53. She does have the hard stop at 7 minutes. I do not. We do not.
Okay.
So I can help with this. The slide deck that I provided and that she provided will make available to you. And I think that there is going to be questions. If there's not, I'm stunned. Afterwards, maybe even not today, but this week, next week. And I think that we'll just keep an open line of dialogue for everyone to work kind of collaboratively to navigate through this maze. Just a real quick recap, though. They have the ability to upload the data. They have the ability to have that stored, and then they have the ability to do both the 1094 IRS transmission and 1095 employee communication. Both of those, two separate chunks, two separate costs between $5,000 to $10,000 per, and then there's the costs for the monitoring the data all throughout the course of the year. So you need to sit down with pen and paper and figure out what that total is, and I would use that as one source, but then look at what other vendors are out there offering this opportunity. You can always do this in-house, but I just can't underscore that enough. That sounds like an impossible task. Yes, Christine. No, it's each one. So the 1094 transmission to the IRS, a $5,000 to $10,000 charge, and it's loose right now because we don't have the guidance. The 1095s, which are going to go out to your employees. So one goes to the IRS, that's the data collection on that side, and on the other side, out to the employees, separate charge, $5,000 to $10,000. All right, you're very welcome. Yes. Annual. It's an annual. 75 cents. That 75 cents is, and Janine, that's a per employee per month, correct, the EPM?
Correct.
So to that point, and I'll just clarify for the people that are on the webinar, we're going to back up and just say that if you're going to key in your variable employees, because you do want to keep a track of who they are they eligible for benefits, etc. That was a $500 charge to build out that structure group, and you're going to manually key them, and the charge to keep that monitor is 75 cents per employee per month. So you would want to, again, pen to paper this out, figure out what your total outlay would look like. And this is just an opportunity to look at one potential vendor, and that's what we wanted to do with today's frame. Okay, Janine, I believe that you have to go, so we'll allow you to drop off. I thank you very much for this. She had mentioned, and you can go ahead and drop and just listen, that there are webinars to speak to each one of these specific points. I'm going to get those for you, and I'll send those out for your review. But I was happy that she was able to join us today so that we could talk about, you know, what the needs are, what the resources are. I kind of thought that that would work well together. Hopefully you felt the same way as well.
Yep, thank you, John. I'm going to drop off now, but if there's any questions, just shoot me an email.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
You too. So there she goes. And I don't know how I changed the screen over. I'm just going to let it be. I'm not sure if we need to move it over. Does anyone have a question about any of the topics that we covered today? There was a lot. Covered a tremendous amount of ground. I have found, I was saying this to John on the way over here, you know, we've talked about this now for 24 months, and it's just every time this conversation happens, there's a nuance that I'm realizing, you know, the grad assistance piece to it, or life events during the course of a measurement period and instability period, and I don't think that there's really anybody out there other than maybe the architects of the law themselves, and I'm not sure about them either, who know this thing through and through. So I think that the collaborative discussion throughout the course of the year is going to probably be our best mode. And as information becomes available, we'll push that out to you, and we'll continuously field as many questions as you guys can answer. I think it's helpful sometimes, though, if I do get a question in from University of the Sciences, if I relay that answer to the group as a whole, because I don't see there's any real need to kind of encapsulate the responses. We can say, like, this was a helpful question with the response, so that everyone's kind of feeling a little more comfortable with this gray that we're dealing with. Maura. Start from January 15. The question is, she has security officers that she's not sure what their definition is. And so, yeah, I would go back to 115, 115. That's when your real onus is, and you can start tracking them. In terms of setting up the measurement and the stability, because I know there's still so much confusion about that. That was our suggestion, the 9-month with the 2-month rolling into 11-1. It seems to make sense. But you have the ability to change that any way you'd like. Some people are doing 3 months. And that's a fast food restaurant that has a tremendous amount of turnover, so they just click, 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 click. Some people want to do the full 12, and that's fine too, but for our purposes, we're an 11-1 group, so it doesn't jive with that. It's a little out of sync. Whoever you decide to ultimately go with, because I would presume that you're going to want to marry up with some technology firm. This is just something I don't feel is humanly possible. Next week, we're going to have a separate conversation with secondary schools. This might be doable on a manual basis for them. It might be. You know, if I have 75 employees, I could do this. I give them benefits to almost every them. I have 2 variable employees. It's manageable. To you, I just don't see it. So whatever software company that you want to partner up with, they're going to be going through all those Q&As that Janine was mentioning there, and just getting the data feeds working in the structure that makes sense, so that at the end of the year, you're comfortable with your compliance and your responsibilities having been met by whatever firm you decided to go with. So, thank you very much for your time. Oh, Emily Miller.
A lot of issues have come up on here, and
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Emily. Oh, and I'll just take the opportunity, since I have some people on the web and the people in the room, just give you an update as to where we are with PAYSBOA. I met with the Aetna rep on Tuesday. They're going to be meeting with us because we want a full-blown proposal from Aetna, which we will obviously present to Blue Cross to make sure that everything is honest there. We have RFP'd our dental. So Delta Dental is the current carrier, but if you move the dental to United Concordia, that takes a point off of the new renewal. So we have put that out to the street, and we'll have 6 vendors come back with quotes for us, okay? And we're looking at moving the life and disability from Unum to whomever else is out there. But again, Blue Cross has that deal that if you move it to Guardian, they'll take another point off the medical. So we're doing everything under our power to keep the costs low with an Aetna quote and compress down on the existing costs with dental and life and DI. That's all evolving throughout the course of the year. And then we're also having conversations, about PAYSBOA as a whole, fully insured, self-insured, captive, looking at every possible angle to make sure that the costs that we are having to hold on to are as compressed and as low as humanly possible. So I wanted to just make sure you're all aware. Mr. Greeno. I'm done. Thank you all. Al Greeno, ladies and gentlemen. Al Greeno. Like Johnny Carson.
Hello, everybody. I'll be very short. I have a reason for wanting to speak to you for a minute, but welcome and thank you very much. I'm the Associate Director of PAYSBOA, and I can't imagine that I don't know any of you, I don't think, except for Ann. So it's great to have you. I was once executive director until Emily bailed me out in about 2009, but it's been wonderful to work with the organization. Most of what I do you wouldn't be aware of. It's negotiating price and service agreements for the schools to use. I also created and generally operate our little affinity groups, of which you are a part, but I don't have so much to do with that anymore. I have one reason to ask you for a minute of your time And that's because I'm working on a project. That's the kind of thing I sometimes get into, chasing my thoughts. And my concern is about the industry of education in this area. All of you at the independent school level, where there are more of them in our group, and you all are probably thinking about your student populations, how to get students, etc. And I am beginning to do some work looking at opportunities for collaboration. I happen to think it's part of something, an idea anyway, that will contribute to everyone's success, if not survival, in such a competitive environment where the population is dropping. So I'm beginning to talk to people about that. I met, Emily and I met recently with Beth Noy, who runs the CEPSI organization. We're going to be looking at possibilities of doing some things with them. I realize that's not in your wheelhouse. It's not in your realm of responsibilities in general, but I wanted to take what I'm working on and what we're doing and thinking. I wanted to just mention it to you in case anybody feels like that's something that someone in your institution would like to be a part of. You just want to let me know that as I begin to gather my ideas and look for people who would like to try things. I mean, that's where it all begins, with a group of people with whom the idea resonates and they decide they're interested. They're willing to commit some time and effort to get some things to try. There's lots of areas of opportunity, but it's only as good as those who see it as a solution and as a path of action. So thanks for your time. I appreciate the chance to meet you. I'm sorry I don't know more of you personally, but say hello whenever you can. Thanks. Thanks, John.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.